webinar is to review melatonin and all of its wonderful uses as we do test it on the Dutch Complete test. Melatonin is a hormone secreted by the pineal gland in the brain, and it helps regulate other hormones and maintains the body's circadian rhythm. The circadian rhythm is this internal 24-hour clock that plays a really important role when we fall asleep and when we wake up. Basically, when it's dark, your body produces more melatonin, and when you're exposed to light, the production of melatonin drops. I like to say that with cortisol is like the sun and melatonin is like the moon. Cortisol should be high through the day and melatonin should be high through night. If you're exposed to bright lights in the evening or too little light during the day, you may have abnormal levels of melatonin. Jet lag, shift workers, and poor vision can all be a real problem with melatonin cycles. The main hormone just before melatonin on the steroid pathway is serotonin, and it takes 2 different SNPs to make melatonin. If there is a problem with one of those SNPs, or with your serotonin levels, you may have a problem with your melatonin. Melatonin is a really important antioxidant and has a number of responsibilities besides just helping you sleep. For example, melatonin helps control the timing and release of your female reproductive hormones. Same for men. It helps determine when a woman starts to menstruate, the frequency and duration of her cycles, and when she stops menstruating or goes into menopause. If her circadian rhythm is off, she may notice that her menstrual cycle is off also. Preliminary evidence suggests it can really help strengthen the immune system. It may also help lower the 8-OHDG levels as tested on the Dutch Complete test that's reviewed on a different webinar. Low levels of melatonin may contribute to high levels of 8-OHDG, which you don't want. While more research is needed, several studies have shown that melatonin may have cardioprotective properties because of its antioxidant and anti-inflammatory effects. For example, it may help lower blood pressure levels, and it might help improve cholesterol profiles. Melatonin is critical for making, secreting, and the action of insulin. Now, insulin is really important for blood sugar management. The action of melatonin regulates the expression of this particular transporter called a GLUT4, or glucose type 4, and this triggers phosphorylation of the insulin receptor. When you have a reduction in melatonin, you may get an increase in insulin resistance. The more insulin resistance you have, the more likely you are to go on to develop diabetes, and of course, excess weight gain, especially around the middle. Melatonin is really important for making sure this doesn't happen. It's often said that sleep is critical for healthy weight management, and this may be a reason why. Because of its antioxidant status, melatonin is also being researched in the oncology field, as it's known that those women with breast cancer often have lower melatonin levels, as do men with prostate cancer. Be aware that melatonin is also made 400 to 500 times more from the enterochromaffin cells in the gut than in the pineal gland. When you have gastrointestinal upset or distress, melatonin is made to act as an antioxidant and anti-inflammatory right in your GI tract. Now, common reasons for higher melatonin could be that you just make higher levels of melatonin. Some people just have really robust levels. Be aware, though, that stress can also mildly raise melatonin. It's an antioxidant and it's anti-inflammatory. Supplementation. Those people taking melatonin will show high levels of melatonin on the Dutch test. The Dutch test is definitely used as a baseline, as we can't monitor melatonin supplementation with the results. Gut inflammation will raise melatonin again, as it is protective. Those people taking 5-HTP or SAMe or tryptophan supplements may have higher levels of melatonin because they're raising their serotonin. It's debated, but certain SSRIs that are used for depression may raise melatonin levels. The birth control pill has been shown to slightly raise melatonin, and certain foods are high in melatonin, such as cherries, walnuts, mustard, corn, rice, ginger, peanuts, barley, oats, asparagus, and tomatoes. Now, what can cause low melatonin or suppress melatonin? Well, of course, the number one thing is exposure to blue light at night. For those people that are on their phones and their computers and their tablets, consider cutting out those things about an hour before bedtime, or buy those blue light blocking glasses that have the orange frames so that you don't get an increase in cortisol and a suppression of melatonin right before bed. Caffeine will raise melatonin. Tobacco will raise melatonin. If you have mutations in those two genetic SNPs, one of them is known as the AANAT, and the other one is known as the ASMT. Those are the SNPs that move from serotonin to melatonin. If you have a problem there, then you won't be able to make melatonin genetically. Again, SSRIs, specifically Prozac or fluoxetine, is shown to suppress melatonin. Calcium channel blockers for blood pressure, such as verapamil or diltiazem, they can suppress melatonin. Beta blockers like atenolol, metoprolol, and propranolol. And NSAIDs, those of you who are taking aspirin or ibuprofen, Aleve, Motrin, Advil, especially later in the day when you're trying to go to bed, you may have decreased levels of melatonin as well. When you're looking at the Dutch test, you want to look at the bottom of page 4 under Dutch extras or the top of page 5 where it's the adrenal page. On the Dutch report, melatonin is pulled off of the waking sample. Now, this is confusing to a lot of people. Why would we pull it off the waking sample? When you're looking at urinary hormones, what happens is that melatonin is made through the night, and then it's pushed into the kidneys, and the kidneys push it into the bladder, and it's held there until you wake up first thing in the morning. So the waking urinary sample that you take actually reflects all the hormones through the night, including melatonin. We don't do a melatonin test on the bedtime sample because the bedtime sample actually reflects the last couple of hours before bed. And we're trying to catch melatonin as it's all through the night. Therefore, we check it on the waking sample. Thank you so much for listening to this webinar on melatonin. If you have any questions, please feel free to contact us as we are always happy to help.